Okay. I call this meeting of the Duncanville Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present, that this meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. We will now move into the budget workshop. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam President and board members. Thank you for being here this evening. Today is our first budget workshop that we're presenting during this budget season. Going into every budget year, I work to establish budget priorities. And so the 4 priorities that we're looking at going into the budget year is to, 1, produce a balanced budget. That basically includes maintaining a healthy fund balance, a healthy reserve. 2, to address compensation for all staff, particularly the auxiliary staff. Been really looking at that and building scenarios to address their areas. The 3rd priority was to continue to enhance the academic programs that we offer here in the district. And then 4th was to provide campus intervention support for our targeted campuses. So this evening, we want to accomplish the following. 1, we want to update the board on the current legislative information. And so we'll be reviewing the major bills from both the House and the Senate. We'll be reviewing the impact that those bills have on the 1920 budget. The second thing is we'll be reviewing the district's current financial outlook. We'll be providing you with an update on the TRE, the ongoing list of general needs that we have throughout the district that we're constantly chipping away at. Also, we'll be reviewing the compensation plan that we have in place. And we'll be reviewing various race scenarios that I have been building for the board's consideration. And then we'll highlight the next steps and, of course, answer any questions that the board has. As we begin the budget season, there are some key dates that I want to share with you. Of course, we are a school district who begins their budget year July 1, and so our budget year starts July 1, and so as we work our way through the process over the next several months, that's a key target date for us so that we can begin to address our needs for the upcoming school year. Our goal is to adopt the budget in June, and so we have the remainder of April. I think we're about a little over 3 weeks left in April, all of May and all of June to continue to work on the budget. The negotiations between the House and the Senate on the final bill could go well into May and possibly into June. And so if that occurs, we obviously will have to go ahead and adopt our budget, and then we'll come back in July or August or whenever the time permits from the time they decide what the final bill is going to be, and then we'll make budget amendments based on the final changes. This week marks week 14 of the 86th legislative session. And we are around, it's somewhere between 65 and 70 days that they have been in session. The bills have changed constantly, and that's just the normal part of the process. And so I think there'll be a lot more changes as they are now basically negotiating what that final bill is going to look like. The session is scheduled to end on the 27th. However, we know, as in recent history, the governor, of course, could call a special session to extend the work if the work is not already completed by the time the session is scheduled to end. Just for logistic purposes, board members, you have a hard copy of the information that we'll be presenting, so feel free to take notes on that, ask questions, and always know that even after this workshop, if there are additional questions, you kind of have some other points you want clarity on, I am always here. I can have staff available, and we'll do our very best to get you the answers that you need. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bigby.
I got one thing to say. The priorities you read, they're great, but those are pretty general, and they were voted on several years. I mean, can we establish some things that are important to the board tonight? Is that what this is for?
Not necessarily that's what this is for.
Then when are we going to do that?
We can do that in our Team of 8 training that we do each year, where we establish what our goals are to target each year. And the points that I mentioned, these are meant to be general. They're not specific. That's not what the intention is. Obviously, the specific work happens every day, all day, but these are just some guiding principles that I use to begin to put a budget together.
I agree with them, I'm just saying, there's some things that I know I want to at least bring up and look at.
Absolutely.
When do I do that? When's Team of 8?
Team of 8 is typically in the fall, so Team of 8 is in the fall.
But then the budget's already done.
Right.
This year.
So the current process we have in place is Team of 8 is when we get together each year and the board establishes their priorities. And so I take those priorities and then I build a budget based on that. And then if there are changes, you all can give me feedback at any point in time, and then
So we can't make any changes or give feedback before this budget's passed?
we can, because this is just the first in a series of workshops. And so this is our first look at the budget. And so we're just launching. And so if there's any feedback that you would like to give, then absolutely, we'll take that information.
I don't mind giving feedback.
Or input or advice or whatever the board would like for us to consider, definitely. But we just want to make sure that we,
I got a few ideas, so I just want to know when to do it.
right, this would be a appropriate time. I just want to make sure I educate everyone on the information that we have from the state so that we can be mindful of that as we make decisions.
And I'm just thumbing through this, when do we get the one that shows the fund where we're spending on each thing?
That's coming down the line.
Well, no, down the line, man.
Yes.
When down the line?
Well, we haven't scheduled any other specific dates at this point. Again, this is the first
I
of,
mean, the next scheduled meeting, the next board meeting, I don't want to leave it hanging in the air where we never get to it.
no, we're going to get to it. Just emphasizing, today is the first of several
After
meetings.
this, if I want some information,
Always,
okay,
always. Any board member, whatever you want,
I'll let you know.
we'll
I
get
got
that
some things I
specifics.
want.
We can
We'll
still
get it to
have
you.
several workshops if we choose.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This is the first.
Yeah.
This is our first, we just got the
So we're
information.
gonna have one tomorrow night?
We can.
No, we can't.
I'm here every day, all the time. We can have a workshop whenever you like.
So can I, I'm retired. I'll be down here with
The staff and I are here to serve,
you.
right?
Another chair in your office?
We are here to serve, and we'll do whatever we have to do
Just move me a chair in your office. I'm up here
to
every
get the
day.
information. But board, please know,
I know you just really
You-
love my help.
there's never not a time if you have input, questions. We meet on a regular basis. If there's something that you want me to consider for the budget, please, I welcome that input.
You might need an office.
Not a problem.
No, I don't wanna be for that much.
Not a problem. We're good either way. Anything else as we get
Okay, I'll
started?
shut up now. Go on.
All right, Dr. Bigby.
I'm scared now.
We're good.
Got to move my stuff around here. Well, good evening. Sick 'em bears.
Are you sick of them?
They be lock me up or any questions?
Great presentation, Dr.
And it's even in color, isn't it? Now go sit down.
Just be ready.
Somebody said they wanted to get to the game.
Yeah.
I don't know who said that. I just can't keep Renee from saying stuff.
He's coming.
I'll take you
Manny's
home
coming.
tonight. He has to leave.
Come on, Manny, what's the deal?
It's off. There you go.
Shouldn't turn things off. Okay,
Well, that's your fault, Manny. Give him one that's on next time.
you know how we are.
We're not gonna, don't get on the elderly, because we can't do that stuff.
Speaking of elderly, I need a bar stool or something up here.
He needs a bar.
Well, if we get out of here soon enough.
Oh, we'll get out of here.
Don't worry about that.
This kind of seems like a letdown after that. Governor Abbott set some priorities. I really hate to get into priorities again, but his for the interim were school finance reform. I'm going to read all these to you: increased teacher pay, school safety. His big push was property tax reform, and I don't know that any of us would have a complaint about that. There was a commission appointed of quite a few people. They published a huge report on what they studied about school finance. And their report basically suggested teacher quality initiatives, instructional leadership initiatives, early learning, and two-way language. And I can't disagree with any of their thoughts on that. The legislature is, well, these folks, well, Dennis Bonner's been a pretty good friend of ours from the House of Representatives. I'm not too sure about Dan Patrick, but we're not supposed to get political up here. But Patrick, of course, is the lieutenant governor, runs the Senate, and Governor Abbott, and then Dennis Bonner. And they have all looked at school finance reform and property tax reform. We'll get to that a little bit. They've chosen to take a little different approach to that than what we thought they were going to. But there's two main bills out there. Senate Bill 3 puts $6 billion into education. $2.3 billion of that is for property tax relief. $3.7 billion is for a $5,000 across-the-board teacher and librarian raise. And what you don't see there is any additional funds for anything else. That's the only funds that are appropriated for that. House Bill 3 puts $9 billion into the education, and the designations are limited, and they're actually more involved than what Senate Bill 3 is. Throw a rock at me or stop me if I lose you here.
Just keep rolling.
Senate Bill 3 is cleared the committee. It's the one with $5,000 for every teacher and librarian. They didn't include counselors and nurses in that, which typically those are included in that group. They actually said they'll fund that part, as well as the TRS contribution that comes with that. As we've talked about before, any difference between the minimum salary schedule and what we pay, we have to pay the state share of TRS. So as this $5,000, if it was to come in, then somebody has to pick up that extra 6% off of that, and they've said that they would fund that. When we put all that in and looked, even though they would fund both of those because of other benefits, if this passes, then the only thing that passes, we'd lose $53,000 next year, and that's for the other benefits that you provide. House Bill 3, it's already passed the House 149-1. It moves the basic allotment from $5,140 to $6,030, which is a pretty substantial jump, but I'll talk a little more about that. There was a floor amendment that mandated an $1,850 raise for teachers. It removes the cost of education index, and this is probably a good time as any to talk about that. In 1991, somebody in their infinite wisdom decided that it's probably more expensive to educate a child in Duncanville than it is in Hooterville in West Texas, because you've got higher costs, you've got higher employee costs. So they put in a system that put a factor toward the basic allotment. The one in Duncanville was 1.12. In other words, if one was educating a child in a neutral setting, then Duncanville should have 12% more funding than that one, because it costs that much more to educate that child. When they put it in 1991, they didn't have enough money to do that, so they factored it by 71%. So even though they said this is what you need, we don't have enough money, so we're going to use a 0.71 factor to reduce it. And it's been that way since 1991. It's never been updated. It's never been anything changed with it, and the 0.71 is still there. This legislation totally removes it. So it basically puts us and any other district at the exact same funding formula, regardless of what it costs to educate a child, which to me, and it's as little fussing as I can do, that was the thing I said, leave it alone, update it, but leave it alone. This alone will cost us about $6 million, or $9 million, excuse me. If they left it in with the new formulas, we'd have $9 million more. But it's gone in both bills, so it won't get put back in conference committee. This bill does fund CATE courses that are in middle school. Before, we had the courses there, but we got no funding for them, which is a good deal. It adds a weight for dyslexia students, which we've never had, 0.1. If a student's 1, then a dyslexic student is 1.1 as far as funding goes. Compensatory ed was 0.2 factor before. They've moved that depending on what level of economically disadvantaged kids you have, from 0.22 to 0.75. They've added a K through 3 early reading weight of 0.1, a dual language weight of 0.1, which has never been there before. They eliminated the gifted and talented weight of 0.12. It's not there any longer in this bill or the other bill. We had a high school allotment of $275 per student in the high school. That's been removed. Theoretically, all of these funds have been rolled into the higher basic allotment. The M&O tax rate, there's a compression factor in the bill. Rather than reducing your tax bill, they've compressed the tax rate, where your values will still go up just like they've always gone up. It's just they'll only allow us to tax at a certain level to raise the same amount of money we raised at the old tax rate. So they're projecting that our compressed tax rate, instead of $1.17, will be $1.09. Transportation allotment, which hasn't been changed since 1984, they're finally moving it from a linear density model, which you had to cram every kid you could into a bus, to how many miles you drive. They've added some funding for college prep assessment reimbursement. That's the AP courses that they're taking. There's some money in there for that. Certification exams, some of the CATE programs that can be certified, they put some money in for that. And the mandatory salary increase is $18.50 for select individuals. They did put a rider in that said any additional funding that we would gain, which we're guesstimating would get about $6.5 million out of this bill, but at least 25% of it has to be spent on salary increases. Doesn't specify, other than the teacher raise, what you do with that. This is a side-by-side comparison of the two. I won't bore you with all of it, but there are some major differences you'll see between House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 3 and Senate Bill 4. Senate Bill 3 had no funding mechanism in it, so Senate Bill 4 is the piece that's supposed to fund it. You can see that House Bill 3, there's $6.3 billion over the biennium. New investment, $1,850 teacher raise, and other employees, which we don't know exactly who that is yet. 3.9 billion, that should be a B there. We didn't look at this but 300 or 400 times and missed that one. For the biennium with teacher and librarian raises of $5,000, and the funding mechanism is to be determined. This is that trust me thing, which scares me to death. Basic allotment, House Bill 3 from 5140 to 6030. Senate Bill to be determined. Full day pre-K, which both of them are funding that, which is to me is a great deal. They'll fund it for all eligible kids, except we don't know how they're going to fund it in Senate Bill 3. Property tax compression, there's $2.7 billion set aside in House Bill 3. There's $2.3 billion set aside for tax rate reduction in Senate Bill 3. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but you heard us talk about golden pennies and copper pennies. That's the amount you tax above $1. That's always been tied to a number that was determined by how rich Austin was. They would take the Austin value, divide it by their weighted ADA, and that's what you'd get for the golden pennies. Well, now they're tying that to the basic allotment instead of the Austin yield. They're also doing change in the copper pennies. Those have always been $31.95 since I can remember, and now they're tying that to basic allotment, which is a plus. Both of those are a plus. Senate Bill 3 and 4, it's not linked to Austin, but we don't know what it's linked to. And the same thing with copper. You'll see a recurring theme here on Senate Bill. Recapture, they'll mitigate about $3 billion of recapture, and that doesn't affect us, but it affects quite a few people in the Metroplex area. So they'll reduce that by 38% over the biennium. I know somebody like Plano is going to keep $100 million that they used to send to the state. They won't have any more funding because of it. They just won't have to send that, write a check to the state. And that'll be determined in Senate Bill 3. Teacher incentive compensation, there was a merit pay piece in House Bill 3 that's been removed. They have added a educator effectiveness allotment of 0.12 if you have a high concentration of economically disadvantaged students at a campus, which I think is a good deal too. It's not specific to a salary increase. The Senate Bill 3 actually created a merit pay system and then guaranteed a $5,000 raise. Test-based funding, there's none in House Bill 3, thank goodness. And Senate Bill 3 creates a third grade reading allotment based on test scores. Compensatory education, we talked about that for a second. There's from 0.2 went to 0.25 to 0.275 depending on your demographics. They haven't determined those yet in Senate Bill 3. Gifted and talented, both of these are repealed in both acts, so we won't see a gifted and talented allotment, even though it wasn't a whole lot of money anyway, but we're still required to have those programs, so the things that we've been doing will still be funded. They just won't have their own funding source. School board goals for early childhood literacy. If the House bill has its way, you'll have to develop a 5-year early childhood literacy and math plan. If the Senate bill's required, you'll have to have a 3 and a 5-year plan. Efficiency audit, if you want to raise the M&O rate, if it has to have voter approval now, just as we did with the TRE, then now you have to hire a firm to do an efficiency audit. And the state will give us a list of the firms that can do those, which nobody seems to know really what they are, but the district will have to pay for that. And there's no provision in Senate Bill 3. Other weights, there's finally a dyslexia weight that's been created, and dual language weights, that's teeth are falling out, in both bills. Kate funding was extended to 6th grade in House Bill 3. It's only extended to 8th grade in Senate Bill 3. And the new instructional facilities allotment, that's what NIFA is. That's when you build a new campus, then the state gives you $250 for every student that's enrolled in that new campus just to buy books and erasers and whatever you do, and then they give you $250 more the next year if that enrollment increases. Before, that's been capped at $25 million. They just came down and drew a line. When they got to $25 million, they just cut it off. Well, they're increasing that to $100 million, which is going to be much more helpful to rapid growing districts than it is to the rest of us, but they certainly need the help there. Other issues, as we talked about, they repealed the cost of education index, the high school allotment. We used to get a staff allotment for insurance. It was a supplemental funding piece that we get. We get that no longer from either bill. Chapter 41, hold harmless. Back in 91, when they first passed Robin Hood, they held districts harmless so they could continue spending the same amount of money they were for 2 years. Well, that's been extended since 1991 till this year. So the property wealthy districts that were spending $14,000 a kid have still been spending $14,000 per kid, and this repeals that, but it does it over time. So I don't know that we'll ever see it repealed. And once again, the transportation allotments are changed. And one interesting thing is the Senate bill goes to current year values. And we're going to talk about what last year values do versus these. And if they do that, it saves the state $1.8 billion by using current year values instead of prior year values. So That's a little sneaky that's kind of slid in there. Any question on all of those? I know I flew through them, and I know you want to go home and study them like I would. Primary areas of concern, cost of education index. I guess I'm probably the only one that's concerned about it, but I would like to have seen it left in. The big talk was property value caps. That's not in either piece. Well, they haven't capped your value. If the values go up 20%, or yours can't go up at 10% a year, but if they go up 10%, they're still going to go up 10%. What they've done is compressed our tax rate so that you don't pay more taxes other than 2.5% more than what you paid last year. Now, that remains to be seen how well that works out. But your tax bill, when you get it, or you probably already have, you may see a substantial growth more than that 2.5. Of course, no legislation changed that yet. But we'll see what works out with that. But don't expect your values to go down or to go up a small amount. They're going to compress tax rates. And I have some concern about that also, but nobody sent me a questionnaire. Mandatory teacher raises, that's a bit of a concern. TRS contributions, right now, the district puts in money, the state puts in money, and the employee puts in money. There's a bill, and it's not tied to these two bills, but it would gradually increase that to try to firm up TRS over the next 10 years. It wouldn't start till 2021, so we haven't included any of that in the budget process this year, but it would raise it about 0.1% every year starting in 2021. And of course, the largest increase is against the district, second largest is the employee, and the third largest is the state, naturally. Uncertainty, changing the funding formulas, well, it's uncertain. Property tax caps versus tax rate compression, that's going to be a harder one to explain. And teacher raises, it is a concern, and Lord knows every teacher deserves everything we can give them. But if the $5,000 raise goes through for only those two categories, and there's no funding for anything else, it's going to make it very difficult. And this is the world according to Bigby. I'm not going to lay it on Dr. Smith or anyone else. It's historically, this scares me, the way they're approaching this. If you remember, any of you that were on the board in 2006, there was a tax rate compression then. We used to have a $1.50 tax rate. They compressed it by a factor of, this was interesting, 0.666. And from $1.50 to $1, that alone should have given us a little clue. But and it did cut what you had to pay in property taxes because it compressed the tax rate. They provided what they called ASTER, which is the additional state aid for tax reduction, which if you lost money because of that compressed tax rate, then the state made it up. At that same time, they reduced the business taxes, if you'll remember, with no provision to make up the revenue that was going to be lost by compressing the tax rate. Their whole idea was our economy is booming, it's growing, and over the years it'll replace that by itself. Well, what happened? In 2008, we had a recession. So if those of you on the board then, the legislature cut $5.3 billion in school funding to balance the state budget because what they'd counted on with the growth didn't happen. In 2013, they restored $3.4 billion of that, and we're still sitting at a net loss of $1.9 billion. The ASATR was eliminated last year. Most of us had grown enough that we didn't need it anymore to go back to that funding level, but some districts did. And all that did was allow people to catch up, not to increase anything. And even if they hold us harmless, it scares me, they can take it away the next session. And what happens if we have another recession? I don't see a mechanism other than they say, okay, we've got some extra money this year, so let's fund this. It's great as long as we have extra money every year to continue funding it. It's like giving salary increases. You know, those stay with you forever. Well, if you don't have some funding for it, then I don't know, it's now you see me, now you don't, with the rug under your feet. But hopefully it won't happen. I'll be fishing if it does. But I'll be thinking of y'all. The nice thing we've done with this, and Dr. Smith will probably go over with it, is what we've built into our thinking this year with the budget is we're assuming no new money. And so everything we'll talk about as we talk about salary increases or anything along that line, it's saying we're going to fund it with what we would get by the old system. Even though we think we're going to pick up anywhere to $6 to $7 million, we're establishing the budget at this time with no new money. So even if something wonderful happens out there, you won't be tied to it next year because you'll be able to cover it with the same amount of budget. So hopefully as we go through that, you'll understand it a little more, or we can make it a little clearer. But once again, these are just my concerns because they did it before. And all of those things with to be determined are a little bit scary. Now they've got all that cloudy in there. Last year, if you remember when you passed the budget, we did it without the TRE numbers. And so the state funding and taxes together was a little over $100 million. When the TRE was passed, that was increased to $109 million. And that was a difference of $9.7 million. Remember, though, over $3 million of that was to pay back INS because we dropped the INS tax rate to raise the M&O tax rate. So that wasn't, a free-for-all on that side, other than the fact that you decided that you would allow us to pay the INS out of the INS fund balance. So that was basically was the number we were working with extra funds, and those haven't anywhere near been spent. And when past the TRE, these are the things, the basic things that we went to the public with. Choice programs, safety and security, buses and technology. Here's some of the funds that have been spent. The choice programs that are beginning at Bird and Reed, the furniture and startup. Yelled too much at the ball game. 106,000 there. The furniture, 240,000. Buses, almost 1.8. Somebody asked along the lines, how much did the election cost? Well, it cost about $102,000. That's not bad to pick up $9 million. So 2.2 million or so of the TRE money has been spent, and those are the areas. If you remember, we brought you a list of about $12 million worth of needs and wants that the district had put together. Well, we've been able to satisfy a little over $2 million of those within the budget this year. So the budget's gone quite well so far this year. These are some items off the want and wish list that we showed you last year that we've been able to fund in the budget this year. 5 teachers at Collegiate, middle school athletic trainers, an athletic office manager, vehicles for the police department, screener software, increased custodial service, remember the tumbler and the chiller for food service, route buses and activity buses, and a forklift for the warehouse, among other things. Here's some major ones that are still on that list, and we're compiling another list at this time. But the turf on the stadiums, even though you've approved this already, it hasn't been spent, so that money hasn't been outlaid yet. 2 additional police officers, 2 more vehicles, Reedenberg tracks, replacement, refresh cycle of the technology, replace the storage and technology, and maintenance contract for network infrastructure. There's about 4 pages of these, but these are some of the major things. So we're working on that list. It's one of those that's going to take a while to whittle down because the funding has been so suppressed. Historically, what's happened in the last 4 years with salaries, in 15-16, there was a 3% of midpoint given to everyone, and the teacher part of that was 1326. 16-17, there was a 1% of midpoint increase for everyone. Teachers got 550 of that. 17-18, employees received 3% of midpoint. Starting teachers went from 50 to 51,000. Existing teachers went up $1,500, and you added $10 a month to cover the increased cost of insurance premiums. And last year, all staff received the one-time payment that you authorized for $1,000, and you increased the $16 a month, which covered the employee cost of insurance. And with that, I'm going to give you Ms. Brown.
Good evening. So at this time, we are going to take a look at our pay overview and our models. Annually, we contract with TASB HR Services to look at our compensation, where we are, and where we are as compared to other districts. And so this is the timeline that we go through. In January, we kicked off the process by starting to have discussions internally about what our needs were as it related to our compensation. In the month of February, that information that was provided to TASB HR Services, they used that to gather market data review and to match common jobs in other districts so that we can compare what we look like to others.
Have we done that?
We do that. We're doing that currently. Yes, we do.
I'd like to see that.
Okay. And then currently, from February and March, we build models for improvement. So based on what that data looks like, we work through aligning our pay structures and looking at the possibility of adjusting employee pay if needed based on the budget that is adopted. So the next slide talks about market districts. These are the districts that we identified as a district to compare ourselves to. And when we're looking at that list, if you look at the enrollment, you'll see some of the districts are a lot larger than us. These districts are not chosen based on their size. They're chosen based on their proximity to our district and where we share staff. We recruit. We share even our substitute teachers with a number of these districts on this list. So as teachers come to us or as teachers leave us or other staff, these are places that they can get to quickly. And so this is why these districts are part of our market study. So if you look at the information we have thus far, so this is some of the information from the TASB HR Services compensation study that we've done. If you will look at the red line, that shows where we are with our starting teacher pay in comparison to these market districts. So currently, Duncanville ISD, we start at $51,000 for 0 years of experience for a teacher. And so you can see we're right there where number 9 is, DeSoto ISD. You'll see also those asterisks next to DeSoto ISD, and so throughout the study, they are comparing us to these districts, but that just indicates that they did not have other data for that particular district other than their teacher pay scale. They didn't participate in the study. So in looking at that, the very bottom shows, of course, our enrollment, our number of teachers, and then where we fall from years 0, 5, 10, 15, 20. And one of the things I want to highlight here is, in one way, it is apples to apples because this is what teachers or others see as we're recruiting them to the district. So if they go to a district's website, this is the starting pay. They'll see what it looks like at those various years. However, in Duncanville, we use that tool as a hiring schedule. We talked about last year, and I want to go back there, letting you know we don't have a step schedule. So some of the districts, or a great number of the districts on this list, have a step schedule. And what a step schedule looks like is if I am a 0-year teacher in that particular district, I know this is how much I'm going to make at year 0, at year 1, at year 2. And so I can look at that every year and say, okay, next year I'm going to make this amount. Year 3, I'm going to make this amount. In Duncanville ISD, this is a hiring tool for us only. So if I'm new to the district, I can look at that schedule and say, this is what I'm going to make coming in. And the way I'm able to see what I would make in the future is based on whatever the board adopts for a pay increase. That is the recommendation of TASB HR Services, that districts do what we do, which is have a hiring schedule, because that then gives our board the flexibility to give whatever increase that they choose to. It gives you that flexibility. On the others, on the step schedule, you have to do that, no matter what. That is what you've publicized and adopted. Questions about that step schedule or hiring schedule?
This is just teachers?
This is teachers only.
Do we have one that shows administrators?
Absolutely. In the task, in the compensation?
I have that one too,
Okay, okay,
along with the compensation study.
okay. So,
Down, Julie.
so with this one, the other thing to consider is across the bottom. For example, with a teacher with 20 years of experience, if they were coming into our district, they would be at $58,058. However, if you look at our actual salaries for our teachers, the average 20-year salary in our district is just over $62,000, and that is because this is the hiring tool only. Okay. So So our salaries in our district for teachers range between $51,000 up to a little over $75,000 for teachers. Okay, this next slide shows just a graph of our market districts, the average pay in those districts, and then the orange red line is our district. And so you can see that we are, based on what steps we've taken over the years, trending underneath the market median for districts that we are in comparison to. And this is based on the hiring scale only. If you compare that line to what our teachers are actually making, then it would be a little closer to that line. All right, this is a tidbit of the information from the salary study as it relates to the percentage of market pay. And so when we're looking at this, we're looking at each group of our employees. The left column is the pay group that those employees fall in, and it tells us how we look to market with those other districts, and then how we look at the midpoint. So on average to those other districts, what are we looking like as far as our pay is concerned? So as you can see, if you look down to the bottom of that list, auxiliary, that is one of the priorities that was mentioned here at the very beginning. We are 91% of the market. So that means that our pay, when compared to those districts in our market groups, we're with about 91% on average for those others. So that is where we are lagging the most, is in auxiliary and in our instructional support. So with that information, of course, this is only a fraction of the study, but what happens with all of that information, we compare those groups, and there are some specific groups within there that we are looking at, because this isn't something we just do annually throughout the year. We're also looking at how we compare to districts. This is the overarching review. So TASB HR Services has recommended a few models for our consideration to see what the impact of the GPI, which is the general pay increase, what impact that would have on our budget. So this will kind of tell us what it would cost us if we gave this amount of an increase to staff in Duncanville ISD. So with Model 1, we'll see if we gave a 2% general pay increase, our teachers and nurses would receive a $1,150 increase, and our starting teacher pay would increase from $51,000 to $52,000. When that increases, of course, it impacts all the other years after that, from 0 to 20 plus years. The other pay groups are listed there, the administrators, administrative professionals. The administrative management, those are non-instructional positions in our district. So in there you'll see a lot of our coordinators and specialists who are not on the instructional side, and business services, human resources, those employees. Our administrative professionals, those will include, yes.
Go back and give me some examples.
Okay, so for example, an accountant in the district would be under the AM side, because they're on the business side, and so their pay falls in there. On the administrative professional side, those are people in our district or staff members who typically they need a certification in the area of from SBAC to do their job. So our principals, our assistant principals, our coordinators in curriculum and instruction, our directors in curriculum and instruction. Our administrative support, those are clerical positions in our district, so those may be campus secretaries or other clerical positions that support within the district. Our instructional support are our teacher assistants, our instructional aides, our behavior aides, those individuals. And then auxiliary, of course, are our bus drivers, our food service assistants, groundkeepers, maintenance workers, all of those employees. So with a 2% general pay increase, that first column shows what it would cost, what impact it would have on our budget to give each one of these groups a 2% increase from the midpoint of their pay scale. The second column shows any adjustments that would need to be made on top of that 2% increase. So the reason those adjustments are there, for example, if we give a 2% increase to our auxiliary staff members, it would cost us $206,234. With doing that, moving that pay scale would also cause us to need to make some adjustments. We want our current staff to definitely be making more than individuals who we are hiring in. So as we change the hiring scale, We have to make sure there is equity for our employees that are already here. So that's what that adjustment column will always indicate. And if on this, with the 2% increase, you can see that the adjustments are higher than the 2% increase. The estimated total increase for all of the staff in Duncanville to receive a 2% general pay increase would be right a little over $2 million is what that would cost us with the adjustments. I wanted to spend more time on the first model just so that we know exactly what we're looking at as we go through the various recommendations. Okay, Model 2, yes, sir.
The $1,500 or $1,150
Mm-hmm.
is from year 1 through
Yes, sir, every teacher in the district.
every teacher.
Yes, sir, every teacher. Mhm. Every teacher in the district, if we gave a 2% general pay increase, would receive that amount. Yes, sir. On Model 2, it's a 3% general pay increase. And so our teachers, our nurses, those on our teacher pay scale will receive an additional $1,700 for that increase. And that would increase our starting pay on the teacher hiring scale to $52,500. As you look through, you can see the same groups are listed and what it would cost us for that general pay increase to make any adjustments needed, and then the estimated total of the increase for a 3% increase across the board would be right at $2.8 million for the district.
And in the adjustments column, that's what say the 34,000 is what the cost of the adjustment is.
Yes,
And then you add it to the general pay increase.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you get this.
get the estimated total increase. So
I'm slower. You just gotta.
yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay. And then the last model is a 4% general pay increase. That general pay increase would increase our teacher starting pay to we'll add $2,300 of an increase to all existing teachers, nurses, and then it would make our starting hiring schedule for teachers be $53,000. And so you can see the total impact on the budget for any adjustments and the general and pay increase for 4% would be $3.5 million.
Where would that put, if we did something like and increased it 2,300, what'd you say, 53? I'm talking about starting. Where would that put us on the list?
Okay, so if you take a look, great question. Let me show you on the list on page, in your book, 28 in your book. The teacher salary by years of experience lists all of the districts there. So you can see $53,000 would put us like with where number 4 is. With 4, where Garland ISD is listed, their current starting teacher pay is $53,000.
And those are this year? These
That
are
is this
current.
year, absolutely. These are all, that's an important point. All of these are based on what they look like currently for the 18-19 school year.
But still a pretty good idea.
Yeah, it puts us there. And so the other factor to consider, for example, when we are working with TASB HR services, our starting pay is $51,000 this year. When they are looking at us in comparison, that is all they are taking into consideration. They are not taking into consideration the $1,000. So for example, the $1,000 one-time incentive that was given to our staff. So in actuality, our teachers receive $52,000 this year. But when you're looking at the hiring schedule, that is not included on this. Okay. The other thing to consider with any of these models is that personnel costs are recurring. So some of the things that Dr. Bigby had listed on there, the buses and the track, different things of that, those are one-time expenses. For example, on this 4% increase, that would be $3.5 million annually to our budget. It will be reoccurring. Okay. Other questions that you have at this time?
I want to just add a couple comments. As you think about the models that you just, that were just presented, I want you to keep in mind the information that I am using to help us get to a point where in June, we can adopt a budget that, that we can fund and support. So if you think about when we started, what happens at the state drives what we can do. So, for example, it would be very preliminary right now for me and presumptuous for me to give any recommendation at this stage in the process of which one of these models would be best for us, because we don't know for sure what's going to happen at the state. So our goal was to share that information with you, help you to see and get a sense of what we're having to deal with every day, all day, as we try to figure out what's best and bring the best plan for you all, knowing that the priorities are to address compensation. So as I'm going through the scenarios, it's in the forefront of my mind that I want to address compensation, because I know that's what the board wants, and that's just our top priority. We want to be more marketable. But we have to do that within the scope of the dollars that the state gives us. And I certainly want to make sure that I don't do so much that, it puts us in a deficit situation, as we've seen what's going on around us in some our nearby districts. So
These are based on last year's numbers, right?
This, as far as the starting pay,
Well, I mean, yeah.
yeah, it's what districts currently look like for 18-19.
So even if we decided to give the highest one, then it's just a matter of, do you think the state's gonna give us less than what we had last year?
I think they're going to give us more. I think that I have guesstimated what that will be. And it is a guess. I mean, because literally,
I realize that.
yes, over the next several days, they will be going back and forth trying to negotiate what that's going to be. On the House side, remember, I'm sorry, on the Senate side, it's $5,000. On the House side, it's $1,850. So what I am estimating is that after they kind of get to negotiating, my guess is it's probably going to be somewhere around 2,000 that they'll settle. And that's just a guess. We'll know, we'll all hear it probably at the same time in the news and that sort of thing. But just as a ballpark guess, I don't think it'll be on that high end, because there'll be too many other things that they'll have to move around, and other districts in the state just aren't going to be able to support that. I also don't think they'll settle on the low end at the state, so I just think it's going to be somewhere in that $2,000 range. That's just my guesstimation.
Well, whatever we decide to do, we have to prioritize where we spend our budget money. So if we want to give more, then we may have to change some stuff, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
What-
Knowing that every change you make is going to have an impact on the district. For example, if you said, well, we need to take away from some of the enhancements that we're doing with our academics, well, that's going to come at a cost with the academics. Or if you said we want to take a different position on technology, well, that's going to come at a cost, and we just have to be okay with that cost. So those are factors that the board will have to just process and think through over the next several months as we work our way to July.
But as we go in to make those kind of decisions, we'll have more specific of where we are allotting our money, right?
Yes,
So we can say, I think we could take it out of here, or, so
yes,
right now, I couldn't tell you, I can tell you what I don't want to do, but
right,
I
right,
can tell you what I want to do.
right,
Well, I can tell you what I want to do, I just don't know how much it's getting.
right.
Lastly,
just a second.
oh, yes, sir.
And that's what I meant as we started out, as the process begins to unfold. This is step one in the process. And so certainly the board can give feedback at any point in time. And then what we're doing is we're constantly monitoring what's going on at the state, and we're literally plugging that information into the funding formulas. And then it produces the budget for us, and then we can see what's doable and what's not, so that we can make good decisions, and then I can bring the best recommendation to the board to consider.
And when will we get that function budget?
Well, you can get the function budget I can get that to the board tomorrow. I mean, that is somewhat,
You've worked on that?
yes.
Sit down, Jody.
Yes. Now, I mean, what does that mean for July? It's really immaterial, really. But, I mean, we can get it to you, but
you gotta start somewhere.
Yes. For us, what we do every day, all day, that document is really not a game changer for us.
Ride it back, you gotta get on.
But we can certainly give that to the board. Yeah, we'll get that to you.
I just want to add, and this probably isn't the time, but, okay. So if we went, and I'm just throwing this out, every time we go with the new teacher salary, it moves us up the ladder and it has an impact on 5-year teachers, 10-year teachers, and they know that when they're coming in here, right? I
Yes,
mean, they know their salary, okay. And I don't know how to do this, okay, but I'm throwing it out anyway. One of the things that I would really like to see in the future, and I've shared this with you, is I know that 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we talked about the number of young, inexperienced teachers that we had and that we were really top-heavy with those teachers. I would like to see something put in place sometime for retention, for some of those teachers, or some kind of retention something to try to keep some of those teachers if we've trained them like we want to train them and our best teachers, because it is so competitive around here. You can go to Mansfield, you can go, this probably isn't the right time to say that, but I mean, I just think that that would be really important too, is for us to try to figure out a way to try to keep some of those teachers.
Absolutely. To speak to that with the compensation study, what I do know about our compensation study, the way our compensation is for our teachers, is that basically longevity is built in because of a hiring schedule. So as our teachers are receiving those increases, we probably can communicate that better to them. So for example, if I come to Duncanville tomorrow and I have 20 years of experience, I'm going to start at $58,058. If I have been in Duncanville and I stay with Duncanville, I'm probably in the high 60s. Right? And so that's because I've chosen to stay, and that's through the work of our board and those generous pay increases over time. So that's how we hold on to our people. If they chose to leave, they would go, and they would go down, go into another district, because they're only going to hire them at what their compensation schedule start is. So it's more fiscally responsible for them to stay in the district. It is. It is. The last thing I would share from the study is that increments over time are important and critical. Some of the districts that we are looking at on that list, as HR Services did caution me to say, okay, some of these people look like they're way higher than you, but they did that so quickly, and they're not being as fiscally responsible as Duncanville is. And so what Duncanville has done is remain fiscally responsible in comparison to this group, and that's something that's not considered when you're looking at the TASB HR, the compensation study, which is very true, and speaks to your work as a board.
Can I ask you one question? On each of your models, you say increase for all teachers and nurses. On this model 2300, where do the librarians and counselors?
Our librarians and counselors are on the administrative professional pay scale. Several years ago, we moved those to our AP. So where our assistant principals, they're on a different grade. So between AP1 and AP4 on our pay scale, those employees fall. So they would receive an increase. It would be 3% or 2% or 4% of the midpoint of the pay grade that they are on. Okay. Thank you.
Take notes, Superintendent.
We built Ms. Brown in as a breather for you. So you have me again. As we talked about those three scenarios, we wanted to see what kind of impact it would have on the budget here. And once again, we're talking no new revenue from the state. We're having to base it all right now. Anything else will be a plus. So if the 2% is what you chose, then we would have about $2 million left for any other kind of enlarged funding you wanted for any other area. In other words, half of what we would have would be taken up by that salary increase. If you chose the 3%, it's at $2.8 million. That'd leave us about $1.2 million for any other increased spending. And if you chose the 4%, then it'd leave us about $420,000. So you can see, unless there's an influx of revenue, which there should be some, we hate to even bring it to you yet because it's so vague out there what it might possibly be. And we throw a number out now, it'll be less than that before they get through with it. So
And this 4 million comes from where?
it's taking, and I'll show you the slide in a second, taking the additional revenue before the TRE. And if you remember, we showed,
Let me ask you,
yes, sir?
educate me. Are we getting, okay, we got 9 million, we gave back 3 million, so we had a gain of 6,
Yes, sir.
okay? And my understanding, tell me if I was right or wrong, we're gonna get that every year because of that TRE election, right?
We are, except for what I'm about to show you with the way the property values have fallen. As long as the property values stayed equal, then we were going to get
But we're
that
gonna
same
get
amount.
We're gonna get something.
Yes, sir. We're going to get more like 7 million and 9
3
million.
million, so now we're gonna have 4 million?
Yeah, if we pay the INS out of that, yeah, and that's where the 4 million number, it's a very generic number, but it was a number to start with.
Is that 4 million, or that added to this 4 million, or is that the
No.
4 million you're talking about?
That's the 4 million I'm talking about. And once again, that's without any additional funding.
But we haven't spent all of last year's, isn't that what
No,
you said?
we haven't.
Well, we
There's
may
quite a
just-
bit that would carry
We
over.
just might have to change the priorities.
Excuse me?
We might have to change the priorities.
That's certainly up to you guys. Now, I'm assuming that we'll have quite a bit that'll have to fold into fund balance, and then however you want to spend it. The problem is when you start spending carryover for salaries, that you start getting yourself in trouble because you won't always have that same carryover. But anyway, we wanted to see what impact that would have. Here's what we're projecting now. This is, we're projecting $115 million in revenue and expenditures of $107 million. Once again, this is because of the TRE influx. There's about $6 million of the TRE money to date that hasn't been spent this year. That's what you were talking about, Phil.
Yeah.
So that, putting that aside and taking that out, it puts about $2 million into fund balance. And if you remember, we took 1.7 million out of fund balance to pay that $1,000. So it's really more like 4, and that's probably going to be higher than that, but that's a very conservative look. So your fund balance is going to be around $52 to $54 million at the end of this year. In debt service, and I really want to emphasize this, you'll notice there's a negative there. That's when we ask you if we could spend fund balance to pay the INS payment instead of pulling it out of that extra M&O, and you allowed that. We told you at the time it'd be about 3.2 million. Well, we collected quite a bit more in INS than we thought we would, so it was only 2.5 million that came out of that. So should be around $11.5 million still in INS fund balance in case you want to do that again next year. And we can pay it another year without affecting anything as far as the next bond goes. They do look at that, how much fund balance you have when they start giving you the bond ratings. So it's something that you have to keep up to a general level. If you remember last year, we budgeted off a 9.5% value growth. We actually came in at about 10.5 since we don't get those certified values till later. Well, they're telling us now to not expect more than 5%. I don't know what any of your property went up this year. I haven't seen anything, but they're telling us to figure about a 5% increase instead of 10.5. And that's where we get into the point where we lose some money. We'll get a certified estimate on the 25th, and they tell us don't take that to the bank. And then we receive the certified values 26 days after you have to adopt the budget. So we're historically try to give you the best estimate of what the values are going to go up. Anything that we're basing right now, we're using the same ADA that we've used for 2 years. That's probably going to be a little bit lower than that. We base the numbers on a 5% value growth, which hopefully it'll be a little higher than that. Tax rates are the same. Once the TRE passed, the tax rates moved to $1.17 and 35 cents. And we're assuming no changes in the funding system and no additional funds from the state. Once again, that's probably a negative view, but it's the smart one to do at this point. How we budgeted, and we've done this for the last 2 years. I think you did something pretty similar to it before. We try to calculate the revenue, which we've done that with the current system. Superintendent asked everybody in SLT to go and gather any additional budget requests from the campuses that report to them, the departments that report to them. We do a per pupil allocation every year. Each campus gets so much money for each student. They get more money for at-risk students. That gives them their annual budget numbers. So I go to each campus, talk to them about that. That's worked out real well because I think it's created some trust that maybe we didn't have before. So I've done that. We've talked about their allocations. HR's conducted the salary comparison, which you've just seen. And then SLT members bring those additional budget requests, and they're prioritized. If you remember, that's the $12 million list that we talked about last year. They're sending that in again this year, and let me tell you, it's not going down any. When you ask somebody, what do you want or need, then they're going to let you know. And that's what we wanted. We wanted to see what the needs were out there. And then we get all of those budgets, put them together, and then the salary side of the budget, however that works out, then that's integrated with it. Change in local values. You can see these over the years. The red one is what the state thinks we have, and remember, they stay a year behind us, and that's what really is great for us as long as we've got higher values. And if you look at every year, the blue line is higher than the red line, which means we get to get a little extra money and get to keep it for 1 year, and then they figure out we've got the raise in values in the next year. And we've been fortunate in that they continue to grow. If you look at the end of this year, the estimate, we've got the report back from them. They say we grew 9.5% last year, which we actually grew 10, so we were 10.5. But the appraisal district's estimating we're only going to grow at 5%. So they think that we're raising money off of a 9.6% growth when we're actually going to be able to raise tax money off of 5% growth. So that's, as you can see, it's the only one of those that looks any different. The rest of them, we've always picked up more funding as we went. And I think I mentioned last year, this is great as long as it doesn't go the other direction. And it appears that it's going to go the other direction. So that's going to affect the amount of funding that we have.
Educate me, what does the CPTD stand for?
That's the Controller's Property Tax Division. They do a study of our values.
I didn't know what it meant.
Yes. I should have let you know that. You wouldn't have known. I didn't know it for years. I just thought it was those people in Austin. Yeah, they do a study, and there's some math involved there. If theirs is 5% different than what ours is, they use theirs because theirs is always higher. You know, the higher our taxes rate are here, the less money the state has to put in. So the comptroller's always pushing for the appraisers to raise your values. It's just a system that's stacked against you. This is enrollment versus ADA. It's not changed just a whole lot. This was in October at the snapshot date. Our ADA is going up a little bit, even though our enrollment's going down a little bit. The attendance in the first 6 weeks was 96%, and that's not happened since I've been hanging around here. I don't know if it has. It's typically around 94, so that's helped us. So you can see that's why we're not changing. We're not trying to put an increase in enrollment for next year. And this is what I was telling you about because of the value change. This last year, everything together, we picked up $109 million. And if you'll look, the taxes for next year are going up 5%, our tax revenue, but look at the state funding, it drops almost $5 million. And that's because they think that we're taxing off that 9.5% when we're actually going to tax off 5%. And this is where, if they did change to current year values, we'd actually make money off of it this year because we went down compared to them. But long term, it'll cost us because we are in a growth area. So instead of $109 million, which was $9 million more than than what we had before the TRE, we would only have 107, or would lose $2.4 million out of that, but just purely because of the values. And Phil, that's where that $4 million got extrapolated. That clear as mud? That's one of the hardest concepts to understand about, and it's the people I used to call stupid in Austin, and they're just smart as a whip. They know exactly what they're doing. They didn't, I'll start preaching if I do anything like that. And that's the presentation. Be happy to try to answer any questions. I know that's 30,000 feet above it, but you actually know just about as much as we do right now.
Any specifics from the board in terms of what it is you would want to have in this budget would be helpful now if you would share that with me, because at least we can start inputting some of that information to be able to kind of see where it's going to fall out and what impact it's going to have on the larger piece. And then, of course, if that's just something you need to think through more and submit that to me later, that's fine too. But if there was something that just really resonated that you said, hey, can we include this? It would be helpful to know that sooner rather than later, so that we can plug that into the different formulas and see the impact that that has. And then I can report back out to you so that at least you're informed on the consequences of the choices that you make one way or the other. And then you can be comfortable with the end decision that you make.
So you're asking for what now?
You mentioned that there might be specific things or different priorities that you all may have had. And so I'm asking if you could share some of that with me, that would be a great thing so that we can begin to start working on that and plugging that information in, seeing what impact it has on the bigger picture. And then I can give that information back to you so that you can be more informed as you make decisions, as we work our way through the process.
You mean besides teacher raises, or is that, I mean, that would be my first choice.
Mm-hmm. Yes, if there was anything that you all
Anything
had.
other- Okay,
Mhm.
the raises would
Yes,
be-
teacher raises are a priority for me. As you
Yeah.
know, I listed that as a top priority going into the budget process. So for me, I'm working really hard to do the best for our teachers. So that's a priority. And that's going to be the biggest cost, which is going to impact whatever else you all may want to, input or add to the budget. So the sooner we know that, keep in mind, we've got April and May. The committee will be doing their work all throughout May. So we'll be monitoring that on a regular basis. We'll have a better feel, hopefully by the end of May, 1st of June, what that final budget number is going to be. That is absolutely crucial, because without that number, we don't really know. Let's just say if you said, well, we want to go with that 3.5 million, and then we do that, and then they don't, say they settle on the 1850, we're in bad shape. So that's why it is a process, and so we have to be very strategic as we kind of work our way through. And so as they roll out more information, obviously I'll be sharing that with you each time that we meet. So even each board meeting, we'll be providing you updates.
Now say that again.
Okay?
If we went with the biggest one, what did you say, 3 million?
That was 3.5 million plus annually every year. And remember, we don't know yet what new money we're going to get. That is what we're all waiting on. That's the negotiation that's going to happen between the House and Senate over the next several weeks. So they both
You
passed.
said 18, what were you said? You said 1850?
Mhm.
What was that?
So that's the House's
You gotta
version.
Slow down now.
Yes,
Slow roll.
absolutely, absolutely. We want to make sure we get it. So think about it like this. The House and the Senate have both adopted a bill, and they both have given a total amount for teacher raises. The House has said we're going to give $1,850 toward teacher raises. The Senate has said in our bill, we're going to give $5,000. And so now that both chambers have passed their bill, what's going to happen over the next 30 to 60 days is now they're going to go through the negotiating of what that number is going to be. And there's going to be some give and take on both sides. For example, one side could say, well, let's negotiate the property tax. And if you're going to, add 2.5 cap on that, then we want you to take away maybe the cost of index or take away the gifted and talent. I mean, they're just going to go through those negotiations on each point. And it is political, but they're going to go through those negotiation points. And somewhere late May, early part of June, they will have gone through that and have made a decision. And then we'll know at that point what that final number in terms of teacher raise and the total amount that they're going to infuse into the district. We'll know what that amount is going to be.
Say we said, and I think in there one of those models said was 2,300, okay? If we said, and we went on with our work and we said 2,300, and the state comes up and says you have to give teachers 2,000, does that, are we covered, or are you talking about 2,000 in addition to what we gave?
We would be covered under that scenario.
Yes.
Yes. Yep. We would be
So
covered.
it's your job,
Yes.
not mine. It's your job to figure out, you're trying to guess.
Yes.
Whatever.
Yes. That's the work that goes
Do you think
into,
because if they're saying 5 and they're saying 1,800, it surely ain't gonna be 5.
absolutely.
It probably ain't gonna be 1,800.
Right, that's my guess.
So it would move somewhere in more like 2,000 to 2,500.
That's, yes, that's, if y'all remember, that's what and again, that's just my guesstimation. Right. So don't hold me to that, but that's what I'm thinking.
Don't get mad at me for using your figures.
That's
I
what-
know you're doing all this research.
Yes, that is, I mean, when you think about it, that is what I'm thinking. I mean,
Okay.
they're gonna go through back and forth, and my guess, it's not gonna be on that high end, it's not gonna be on that low end, it's gonna be somewhere in the
I
middle.
understand a lot better now. I don't think we need a meeting tomorrow night.
Darn.
Dr. Smith, I have a question.
Yes.
Sure looking forward to that.
22 and 23.
Okay, let's get to 22 and 23.
Items from the want and wish list. Dr. Bigby mentioned that there's 4 pages of wants, but I didn't see counselors on this list. Are counselors part of the wants that we're budgeting for?
Yeah, so this is not the full comprehensive list of 12 million. So these were just some of the big items. Counselors are on there, as well as just a number of other items. So these were just some of the major pieces.
Yeah, this was talking out of the non-personnel piece of it.
Okay.
There
I
are
just-
definitely
I saw
people on that list.
Police officers and athletics office manager, so I figured I'd
Right.
ask about the counselors.
Good question.
Are we supposed to, if we have a wish list, I mean, is that what you're asking for right now, or do it, I mean,
Well, I guess
I
I'm
know, I
asking for
mean-
clarity because
mean-
it was presented that there might be other things that you all had that you wanted to add to the budget. And so for me, if there is, I certainly want to know that so that I can make sure I add that in. So it's just more of a clarity question for me. If you could be more specific, then I can go to work on that.
it probably isn't gonna happen, that's why I'm saying it's probably a wish list, but she just brought up the counselors. I would really like to see, I think one of the things we hear, even though all of us in here know what a great job we're doing at the high school, because it's one high school and it's so large, when the community doesn't know what's going on, that's where you hear a lot of the negative stuff. I would love to see more boots on the ground. I think when the counselors have as many kids as they got, and so that's adding personnel units. And so that's more added money, but I would love to see, for me personally, maybe more assistant principals to help with, I mean, you've got parents calling, they've got to do, I mean, and they're supposed to be out, and they're doing teacher evaluate, I mean, and I know that's all.
That's
I
good,
know
though. That's
that's
good.
all,
That's good.
personnel units, which is just a little bit more money, but I just feel like that maybe, and I know the counselors and stuff that are there, by the time they're doing all the academic stuff, and along with, I still feel like if kids come in and they're having a really bad day or something's really happened, that if you've got deadlines to meet and you've got things to do, that it's the kids who maybe a parent died that needs just some time, that they don't feel like they have enough time to really work with them.
Yep.
That's just me. I'm
Those
sorry.
are all good points, and I've taken notes on that, and staff is helping me to keep track of that, and we'll go to work
I
on it.
know it's personnel units.
We'll go to work on it.
But I just.
But those are
and
perfect
even-
examples of
and
what I'm
even-
asking for.
Even this, which we just had our job fair. I know that we have the proximity learning, and I know it's good, and I know that we have that for those hard-to-fill areas. But I really hope, a wish list for me, that if we have gone all year long, off and on, with not having geometry teachers or algebra 2 teachers, or that we, right now, have a good pool, and that we really get on that and try to have, especially those sophomore and freshman years, those teachers that covered, where we don't have kids who have substitute teachers all year long. And I would like it in physics too, because I think we've gone several years without a physics teacher. That's just me, I'm sorry,
But those
that's
are,
a wish list.
yeah, those are good points, exactly what I needed. Thank you.
I certainly support what she says about increased APs or counselors at the high school. I also think it might be worth pursuing and looking at the addition of some psychological type people, sociology type people who could really have the background and knowledge to work with our at-risk kids who need that type of help. Because I know a school counselor, while they're, their main job is just to take care of kids, they sometimes don't have that background to be able to sit down and talk like kids need to be talked to, whereas a psychologist or someone with that type of counseling background might have. The other thing about the proximity learning that she mentioned, I too feel we need to make as much of a push as we can to fill those hard-to-fill positions with highly qualified people, so we can kind of back out of that proximity learning. To me, proximity learning would be good because I could repeat the lesson several times, and that's what it takes for me to get things normally. But all kids don't like that, and I've heard some negative things, more negative things about it than I have positive things about it. So, true or false, I don't know, but it's something we need to look at. Another thing for a wish list, I'd like to see us again look at ROTC, bringing that back to life and see if we can't fill that as a goal to incorporate in an upcoming school year, at least within the next 2 years, because I think all the schools around us have it, and it seems to work well in those schools, and I think it would give our kids something to look forward to, plus it'd give them another avenue to have a career goal at the end of high school.
On ROTC, though, they had the option to come to us. We came with open arms, and we didn't have the facilities for them.
Well, but if you remember, several years ago, we made facilities for them and didn't ever fill it. We remodeled an area at the high school just for that, and it never came to fruition. It's before you, Dr. Smith. It just never, because we couldn't find someone to run the program. I think we couldn't get that retired Army or some officer to fill that. But I just think it's worth pursuing. So that's for a wish list. That would be a wish I would have, that we try to make that happen so we can say we have it and do something positive with it, because it's a great program for young people to be involved in.
Went to, at the conference last year, what was the school district that had a model where they had a licensed counselor?
Anna.
Anna. See, yes, I do go to meetings when I go to conference.
I
Not
better
all of them,
write
but I
that
do go
down.
to a few
Can I
of them.
quote you,
Anna.
Louis?
Yeah, and
Anna.
my wish, I'd like a bigger board bonus at Christmas.
Can double it.
So, write that down.
I brought that back a long time ago from those SLI conferences about that, and it just never was acted on because nobody really thought that it was something we needed. But I think our needs have changed a lot and over the years, and it certainly would be a benefit, I think, for our students to have that capability. And for our staff, take some of the pressure off people who aren't qualified to deal with those type things, to have people who are qualified to deal with those things. As long as we're wishing.
That's good feedback. Go ahead, Joe.
Yes, sir. You know, my background's in logistics, so obviously I'm concerned about, buses, rotation, schedule, all that type of equipment. But with current technology, there's seat belts in the buses now, there's just the maintenance, you have warranty, there's different options there, so it's something I always think about.
Got it. Thank you. Ms. Fahey, you have anything for me?
Just the same, ROTC's been on my list for many, many
Great.
years. And if we had buckets of money, I'd love to see our ag program. I mean, if we don't have food, we're not gonna live. I just think it's a good opportunity for all kids and especially our kids. Because it's a nice ag farm. Or we could put our academy there, our K through 12 academy, I mean, that's just a nice piece of property to do good things with.
I agree with that. It's something I've talked to Dr. Smith about repeatedly about bringing that back. And I know we have kids at the high school that want it now, where originally that was the reason it was dropped, because we didn't have kids who wanted that program, plus we didn't have teachers because they all left. But if we have kids who want it, and we have a facility that obviously we'd have to spend some money on to refurbish, again, it's just another good program for kids to get them involved. Another thing, just to mention that I like to see us pursue is an AVID program. We've talked about that in the past, and it's just, again, something that's never happened. And it's just another good opportunity to deal with kids that we deal with and help them graduate from high school and be able to move on, so.
Okay, all good feedback, very good feedback. Thank you.
Oh,
We
and
will get to work.
there's a list this long, but we'll talk.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Ribeyes at the meal before the meeting.
Anything, Board President, from
No,
you?
are there any other comments? Okay, being that there's no further business, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
You need to give this, Jody.